They told him, "You want to get put on? Go drop a 60." That's how deep the hate runs between the Rollin 40s and the Rollin 60s. Two Crip sets, same flag, same streets, but locked in one of LA's most brutal hood wars. And this isn't no quick beef. This feud ran for years. Bodies dropped back to back. Homies who used to fight side by side started airing each other out. Funerals turned into war zones. Block after block, more blood spilled, and most of it was Crip on Crip. This is Rollin 40s versus Rollin 60s, a street war that's been active for decades, and it's taken out homies, families, and whole blocks. So how did it all start? And why would a Crip have to kill another Crip just to prove loyalty? Join us as we take a deeper look at the Rollin 40s versus Rollin 60s beef, how and where the smoke really began, and what's happening now. Where the Crips came from. Out in South Central LA, it's hard to walk through certain blocks without knowing who runs them. The Rollin 60s and the Rollin 40s Crips hold it down on different sides, but don't get it twisted. They aren't just flying the same blue flag. These sets got serious beef, the kind that runs deep, the kind that gets passed down. And while both sets fall under the Crips name, that don't mean they ride together. To understand how two Crip sets ended up in a deadly war, you gotta go back, way back, before the 60s, before the 40s, back to the days when LA's gang scene was just starting to heat up, back when the streets first learned the true meaning of the word set. So let's break it down, where it started, how it changed, and how the Crips became one of the most feared names in LA's gangland. Well, you see, the Crips didn't pop up overnight. Some say it all began in 1971, when two high school dudes from LA, Stanley Tookie Williams and Raymond Washington, came together to protect their block. Word was, they formed a group to keep themselves safe from rival gangs. That was the story on the streets. But there's another version, one that goes deeper. Some people claim Washington wasn't just trying to start a gang. They say he was inspired by the Black Panthers, a political group that fought for black rights. According to that version, Washington wanted to start something that stood for power, respect, and protection, a movement that later turned into a gang. At first, the group was called the Cribs, maybe because most of the members were young, like kids in a crib, or maybe because crib was slang for home, no one really knows, but that name didn't last long. Soon people started calling them the Crips. Some say it was a mispronunciation, others say it stood for Cribs plus RIP, meaning they lived and died for the set. And then there's the wild version, that it came from cripple, because some OGs used canes or left enemies walking funny. Whatever the name meant, by the early 70s, the Crips had already gained a rep. These dudes weren't just out here throwing up signs. They were running extortion, stealing, and beating down anyone who got in their way. It wasn't just a crew anymore. It was an army, and it started spreading fast, block by block, hood by hood. Now when the Crips started growing, it shook the whole city. Other sets began popping up just to fight back. That's where the Bloods came in. They formed in direct response to the Crips' takeover. They weren't about to sit back and let one gang run all of LA, so the war began. But here's where things get messy. Even though the Crips were all flying the same color, blue, they weren't exactly united. Each set had its own turf, its own OGs, and its own enemies. And sometimes that enemy was another Crip. Some sets tried to keep it cool, but others, they didn't play that friendly Crip on Crip stuff. Territory was everything. Respect was everything. And if another set crossed the line, even if they were under the same Crip name, it could spark a full-blown war. That's how the Rollin 60s and Rollin 40s ended up at each other's throats. Same banner, different block, and no one was backing down. By the late 70s, the game had changed. Washington, one of the Crip founders, was shot and killed in 1979. Some say it was another Crip set that pulled the trigger. That same year, Tookie got locked up for murder. Years later, he became an anti-gang speaker from death row. But by then, the damage was done. The Crips were already deep in the game and blood was already on the streets. The 1980s brought a new hustle to the hood, crack cocaine. And when that hit the streets, everything changed. The Crips saw the money in it and jumped in fast. Suddenly, they weren't just about banging. They were about business, drug business. Some sets got so deep into it, they even linked up with Mexican cartels. The money was flowing. Cocaine, weed, pills, whatever moved. And it wasn't just LA anymore. The Crips spread across the country. By the early 2000s, they had a presence in over 40 states and more than 20,000 members nationwide. But LA, that was still the heart. That was still the center of it all. With all that power came even more violence. Carjackings, robberies, drive-bys, it was chaos. And the Crips' biggest enemy, the Bloods, were right there in it too. Blue versus red. It showed up in the streets, in the music, even in what shoes they wore. Crips rocked British Knights. Bloods picked something else. Even in silence, the message was loud. But here's the truth nobody really talks about. More Crips were killed by other Crips than by Bloods. The infighting, the set wars, the jealousy, it tore them apart from the inside. That's why a Crip might have to put in work on another Crip just to prove they're loyal to their own set. That's how deep the distrust ran. The violence even made it into pop culture. Movies, rap, and news headlines. Everybody knew the name Crips. But behind all that, real lives were getting lost, families destroyed, blocks turned into war zones. But this whole gang thing, it didn't start in LA. Gangs been around forever, even way back in ancient times. In Rome, gang-like groups messed with politics and ran the streets. In the 1600s and 1700s, England had gangs like the Mohawks that people were scared of. Same energy, different time. When America was still young, gangs were part of the story too. Even during the Revolution, some street crews backed the Patriots. Gangs helped with muscle, votes, and power. And that connection between politics and the streets kept going for years. Fast forward to the 1800s and early 1900s, cities like Philadelphia and Chicago were packed with gangs. Chicago alone had over 1,000 sets back in the 1920s, and most of them were tied to immigrant communities. Irish, Jewish, Italian, later on, Asian, and Latino. Every wave of newcomers had to fight for respect, and gangs became their way to survive. During the Great Depression and World War II, gang life slowed down, but it came back strong in the late 1950s. By the 80s and 90s, law enforcement was calling gangs the biggest threat to public safety. Stats showed gangs were behind a huge chunk of drug sales and murders in big cities. By the 2000s, there were over 750,000 gang members in the US and nearly 25,000 gangs. From big cities to small towns, they were everywhere. But LA and Chicago, they stayed on top as the most active and dangerous. Gangs weren't just an American thing either. They were moving heavy in Europe too. The UK, Germany, France. After the Soviet Union fell, gang violence popped off in Russia and Eastern Europe too. Across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, wherever there was poverty, cities, and struggle, gangs showed up. Sometimes alone, sometimes tied to major crime networks. Back in the US, Crips and Bloods were still going at it. But so were Crip sets, like the 40s and 60s. Because no matter how deep the name ran, loyalty wasn't always guaranteed. The Rollin 60s. The Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips ain't just another street gang. They're one of the biggest Crip sets out there, heavy in Los Angeles and known across the country. They first came together back in 1976, around Hyde Park in LA. These weren't just some random kids on the block. They broke off from the West Side Crips and built their own name, their own rules, and their own rep. Over time, their name traveled, and they started popping up in other cities too. Today, it's estimated that they got around 1,600 members. That's not just deep, that's serious numbers for one set. If you've been in LA, especially the wrong parts of it, you might have seen signs. Seattle Mariners caps, White Sox logos, or heavy blue fits. That's how they mark themselves. And when they hit the streets, they leave their tag behind in graffiti. That's how you know the 60s are posted. That corner, that wall, that's their turf now. But the story of the 60s isn't just about size or style. It's about what went down in the name of that set. One of the earliest stories that put the 60s on the map was back in 1984. Two dudes tied to the Rollin 60s were arrested for killing 4 people from the family of a football player named Kermit Alexander. The twist? They hit the wrong house, wrong target, wrong family. The whole block was shook. The headlines made sure everyone in LA knew who the Rollin 60s were after that. And that wasn't the end of it. In 1988, a woman named Karen Toshima lost her life in a shootout. She wasn't a gang member. She was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. The bullet that took her out came from a Rollin 60s member. That one act changed everything for a lot of people. It was a reminder that when gangs go at it in public, it's not just enemies who get hit. Sometimes it's innocent people too. Then came 1992. That year, a Crip known as Keith "Stone" Thomas was killed. Now Stone was a big name, a kingpin. His death brought out around 400 people to his funeral, even law enforcement. That crowd didn't just show respect. It forced the city to stop and think. Youth worker and activist Chilton Alphonse said something that stuck with people. Once upon a time, the Rollin 60s were a family. Now I think a lot of these youngsters are beginning to question, is it really worth it? That was real talk. Some of the younger heads started asking if dying for the set was worth what they were getting back. By 2004, it was clear that the Rollin 60s weren't just another Crip set. A news outlet straight up called them the largest black criminal street gang in the city of Los Angeles. That wasn't just hype, that was fact. Their name had weight, their presence had reach, and their numbers kept growing. But it wasn't just street soldiers making headlines. Some Rollin 60s became known for other things too. One of the most famous was Nipsey Hussle, rapper, businessman, and community activist. He always repped his set. Even when he made it big, he never forgot where he came from. But not every member had a clean story. Georgia rapper Quando Rondo, who claimed the Savannah branch of the 60s, was arrested in 2023. Police said he played a leadership role in the gang. That's heavy, being a known face and still getting caught up in gang moves. And then there's Eugene "Big U" Henley Jr. His name rings out too. He got arrested back in 1991 in a drug sting. Some gang experts said he was one of the top leaders of the Rollin 60s. He never claimed it openly, but people in the know said he was up there. After serving time, he got out in 2004 and started a nonprofit called Developing Options, Inc. He tried to give back, tried to help the youth. But then in March 2025, it all came back. Big U was arrested again, this time accused of running a mafia-like racket tied to the Rollin 60s. You can walk away from the set, but sometimes the set doesn't walk away from you. At Stone's funeral years earlier, one man stood out, Kata Rock. He had a Rollin 60s tattoo, and he spoke about the brotherhood, about what the set used to be. That was a reminder that for many of these men, the gang wasn't just about violence, it was about belonging. It was a family. But like all families, this one got twisted by pain, pride, and the street code. That's the Rollin 60s, a set built on power, loyalty, and survival. But behind every tag, every turf war, and every blue flag, there's a story. And this one's far from over. Now what about the Rollin 40s? The Rollin 40s. In South Central Los Angeles, just a few blocks can decide your fate. And in a tight 3 square mile stretch, the Rollin 40s neighborhood Crips hold it down. This set, one of many under the Crip umbrella, is known for more than just colors and signs. It's known for being one of the most violent crews in the city. LAPD has even named the Rollin 40s as one of LA's top 10 most dangerous gangs. And when you dig into their history, their structure, and the way they move, it's not hard to see why. The Rollin 40s started on the west side of South Central. They fall under the Neighborhood Crips Alliance, which also includes sets like the Rollin 60s and Rollin 90s. Because their names all end in 0, these sets sometimes ride together, but only when the street politics line up. The Rollin 40s themselves are made up of different cliques: the Western Side Crips, Dark Side Crips, Parkside Crips, and Avenue Crips. These cliques are all part of the same set, but each one controls its own turf, from Vernon Avenue to Limert, between Crenshaw and Figueroa. That stretch of blocks isn't just random land, that's territory, and it's protected heavy. Inside each clique, there's a shot caller. He's the one that calls the plays. Whether it's moving weight, handling beef, or laying low from the law, the shot caller's word is final. And when he gives an order, the rest follow. That structure keeps the gang tight, but it also keeps the violence running like clockwork. The Rollin 40s aren't just a group of wild heads running loose. They're organized, strategic, dangerous. These dudes are known for getting into murder, robbery, and drug pushing. But that's just the surface. They've also been deep in gun cases and assaults. And once the feds got involved, the streets really started talking. Because what happened in 2009, that was next level. It showed just how serious the game had gotten and how far law enforcement was willing to go to bring the 40s down. Operation 40 Ounces to Freedom, October 21st, 2009. That's the day everything changed for the Rollin 40s. More than 1,000 police officers and federal agents hit the streets in one of the biggest gang busts LA had ever seen. They weren't just rounding up random members. They came with names, indictments, and a plan. This wasn't a raid, it was a full-on operation. And it had a name that carried weight: 40 ounces to freedom. When the sun came up, warrants were flying, doors were getting kicked in. 74 members of the Rollin 40s were hit with federal and state charges, all tied to a major drug operation. These weren't small-time busts. 29 members were charged in federal indictments for moving crack, meth, and carrying illegal firearms. Another 45 were hit with state charges in LA Superior Court. Some were already locked up, others were picked up that day, and a few were still on the run. The FBI and LAPD didn't just pick the Rollin 40s at random. They had stats, reports, crime maps that lit up with violence in that same 3-square-mile territory. The task force had been watching since 2008. They tracked every corner, every transaction, and every body that dropped. They focused on the shot callers, the ones pulling the strings from the top. That's where the real power was. That's where the damage was coming from. And when the feds moved in, they moved heavy. Over 50 felony arrests had already gone down before this main sweep. Another 35 were picked up for misdemeanors. Among them, active parolees, dudes on felony probation, and gang members from nearby sets. The heat didn't just land on the Rollin 40s, it burned through the whole neighborhood. During the bust, they found more than drugs. Task force members seized multiple handguns, rifles, and a serious amount of cash. And it wasn't just on the streets. The LAPD and city attorney's office found 6 properties where gang members were using homes to store drugs and guns. That led to 5 nuisance abatement lawsuits. The city wanted those places shut down, permanently. They even filed an injunction to keep the gang from using those spots again. Property owners were warned, evict anyone running illegal business or face legal action yourself. The city attorney wasn't playing either. He pushed for civil penalties, orders to stay away from gang members, and major changes to how those properties were run. The heat was coming from every side. Cops, courts, federal prosecutors, even local fire and transportation departments got involved. And when the bust was over, narcotics were seized, around 10 weapons were in police hands, and a message had been sent. No set was untouchable. The federal side hit the hardest. Sentencing laws meant that many of the 29 defendants were facing 5 to 10 years minimum. A few of them, 20 years to life. That's not street time. That's real Fed time. These weren't slap-on-the-wrist cases. These were meant to break the gang's structure and shut down their operation from the inside out. Every agency that could help was pulled in. Corrections, parole, ICE, even Child and Family Services. That's how deep this thing went. The FBI LAPD task force had one mission: clean up violent crime in LA, and the Rollin 40s were right in their crosshairs. As they put it, this was part of a larger effort to stop gang activity across the country. And this operation, it was a message to every set watching. The Rollin 40s had made their name known, but with 40 ounces to freedom, the system hit back just as hard. The war between the streets and the law was in full swing, and for the 40s, the game would never be the same again. The night the Rollin 40s and 60s turned on each other. You see, Crips don't just beef with Bloods. They've been known to go at it with each other for decades. On the east side of South Central, that's been happening for years, like the wars between Avalon gangster Crips and Broadway gangster Crips. But on the west side, things were different. The neighborhood Crips were known for keeping it solid, standing together, and not letting petty drama blow up their alliances. That peace, though, wouldn't last forever. On the early morning of Sunday, August 4th, 2013, everything changed. That night, an after-hours lounge near 111th Street and Western Avenue, deep in Rollin 100 Crips territory, was packed. Different Crip sets showed up to chill. There were Rollin 100s, Rollin 30s, Rollin 90s, Rollin 40s, and Rollin 60s in the same room. It was supposed to be a smooth night. Food, drinks, music, and a moment of unity between sets that usually stayed in their own lanes. But it didn't stay peaceful for long. A member of the Rollin 60s got into it with a member of the Rollin 40s named Edwin Van Joshua, better known on the streets as Tiny Crazy. He wasn't just a name, he had hands. Edwin was known to hold his own in a fight. And that night, he did just that. He got into a one-on-one with the Rollin 60s member and came out on top. What should have ended as just a fight didn't. As more 60s and 40s members jumped in, the vibe turned ugly. Then came the moment no one could take back. The 60s member who had just fought Edwin pulled out a gun and fired. Edwin was hit multiple times. At 5:07 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Another man was shot too, but he survived after being taken to the hospital. Word of Edwin's death spread fast. Before the sun even finished rising, it was all over the city. And while some on both sides tried to cool things down and keep it from turning into a war, it was already too late. Now, the 40s wanted payback, but the 60s weren't backing down. Just like that, a brotherhood that had stood for decades was torn apart in a single night. The two sets that once fought side by side, against Bloods, against Hoovers, against outside threats, were now gunning for each other. And when former allies become enemies, it gets deadly fast, because they know each other's moves. They know where you chill, what car you drive, where your family stays. That's what made the fallout so dangerous. The streets were about to run red, and both sides were locked in. It didn't take long for the violence to explode. Right after Edwin's murder, the Rollin 40s made their move. They pulled up on 10th Avenue, a known hangout spot for the Rollin 60s. Without warning, they opened fire on a group of men standing outside. That was just the beginning. But the 60s weren't just going to let that slide. They jumped on social media to clown the 40s, claiming all their shots were airballs, meaning nobody got hit. It was street talk, but it added fuel to the fire. Mocking your enemy after a hit attempt? That's a straight-up challenge. And so the 60s hit back hard. They rolled into Rollin 40s territory and lit up their spots too. Hangouts were getting shot up. Blocks that once felt safe for one side were now war zones. It wasn't just about territory anymore, it was personal. And when Crip on Crip beef turns personal, there's no telling how far it'll go. Other sets tried to stay out of it. Rollin 30s, Rollin 50s, Rollin 90s, and Rollin 100s all stayed neutral. They didn't want to pick sides. They saw it for what it was, a family fight that had gone way too far. Even the 40s and 60s respected their decision not to get involved. But just because the rest stayed out didn't mean the drama slowed down. This wasn't even the first time the Rollin 40s went at it with a Crip set in their own car. From 1996 to 2006, they had a long, deadly feud with the Rollin 30s. That war lasted 10 years. So when the 60s became the new target, the streets already knew this wasn't going to end quickly, and the bodies started dropping. On August 6th, just 2 days after Edwin's death, a man named Mitchell Graves, 54 years old, was walking through Rollin 60s territory near 62nd Street and Madden Avenue. Two men came up on him on foot and opened fire. Mitchell was shot multiple times and was pronounced dead at 11:11 p.m. that same night. Police believed it was the Rollin 40s who pulled the trigger, but that wasn't the end. On August 27th, just 3 weeks later, a group of people were chilling outside an apartment building on 64th Street, deep in 60s territory. Among them were two young men, Antonio Riley, 18, known as Crafty Blue 3, and Trayvon Jackson, just 16, who went by Shady Hug 3 and Hugabug 5. It was just another summer evening, until a light-colored car turned onto the street, rolled up, slow, and let off shots. The crowd ran for cover, but the damage was already done. Both Antonio and Trayvon were hit multiple times. By the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. They were pronounced dead at the scene. A third person was shot too, but survived after treatment. Cops came through, roped off the scene, and began their investigation. What started as a fist fight at a party had turned into one of the deadliest internal wars the Rollin sets had ever seen, a war that wouldn't end. After the murders of Antonio Riley and Trayvon Jackson, the streets didn't go quiet. They exploded. Officers at the scene found bullet casings scattered along the road. A witness said they heard over 20 gunshots. Word of the double homicide spread fast, and so did the rumors. Some said it might have been the Inglewood family gang. Others pointed fingers at the A-Tray gangsters or even the Hoovers. But as the hours passed, the truth started to surface, and it hit hard. It wasn't outsiders, it was the Rollin 40s. Not only did they carry out the hit, they hit the internet and took credit for it. On social media, the 40s mocked the 60s, throwing up posts and comments meant to taunt the rival set, the kind of disrespect that cuts deep. And just like that, the beef got hotter. More shots, more bodies. The war that began over a fight had now turned into a full-on neighborhood conflict, one where bullets did the talking and social media spread the message. Some even turned the war into music, dropping tracks filled with coded threats and street slang. One line rang out, "I'm Avon, ain't no peace treaty. We still see *K." And another line aimed straight at the 60s. "We thought the hood was gonna get sick when Shady Hug got whacked." These weren't just lyrics, these were warnings, street messages wrapped in beats. Even though most of the Rollin cars stayed out of the war, the 40s and 60s kept firing, and with each retaliation, the pain ran deeper. While the war stayed active, there were some who tried to change the game, people who came from the life, but wanted something better. That's where Ronaldo Reeser and Gary Dorden came in. But even in the middle of peace talks and community events, violence would still come knocking. In 2016, a man named Ronaldo Reeser, also known in the streets as Wiz, tried something different. Ronaldo had been a member of the Raymond Avenue Crips, but he had moved on. He wasn't banging anymore. He wanted to fix the streets that raised him. So he started an organization called RACE, which stood for Reclaiming America's Communities Through Empowerment. His goal? To bring enemies together and end the cycle of revenge. Helping him with that mission was Gary Dorden, better known as Big Twin from the Rollin 40s. He earned his nickname because he was born 6 minutes before his twin brother Jerry. Gary wasn't just a name in the gang world. He had a real past. He was active in the streets during his younger years, but grew tired of the violence. So he stepped away and began working with GRID, an anti-gang program called Gang Reduction and Youth Development. Gary said something powerful once. "We all got the same suffer. We want to work. We want better for our hood. We want our kids to have a better place to come live and hang out. You gotta start from us. If we don't do it, who else gonna do it?" Gary and Ronaldo didn't just talk. They acted. They started a softball league to bring different Crip sets together. The idea was simple. Let the sets play ball, break bread, and maybe build peace. Teams included the Rollin 30s, 40s, 90s, Raymond Crips, East Coast Crips, Nutty Block, Santana Block, and more. The one set not allowed in? The Rollin 60s. The beef was still too fresh. By the summer of 2018, the league was in full swing. Games were competitive but peaceful. On Sunday, July 1st, the Rollin 40s beat the Rollin 90s, 48-5, in San Pedro at Peck Park. But just when it felt like things were working, a ghost from the war walked in. Xavier Guerrero, known on the street as Chico, showed up. He was a Rollin 60s member. Organizers were on edge. The 60s weren't even supposed to be at the games, let alone walk through the park. Xavier was told to leave. Things got tense, but he eventually walked away without causing trouble. Later that day, Gary Dorden went to visit his grandmother for her birthday. Then he stopped by a friend's house just a few blocks away on Van Ness Avenue. It was around 7:30 p.m. and Gary was standing in the driveway talking with 5 friends. That's when a black Mazda pulled onto the street and stopped. 2 men jumped out. They started firing into the group. No words, no warning. Bullets hit the home, the driveway, even the cars. Everyone scrambled to get away. When it was over, Gary had been hit. A bullet entered his left shoulder, pierced his heart and lungs, and landed in his liver. By the time paramedics arrived, Gary had no pulse. CPR was done all the way to the hospital. The ambulance got there at 8 p.m., but it was too late. Gary Dorden, father of 5, peace activist and former Rollin 40, was pronounced dead. Another man was shot too and had to be placed on life support. He made it out alive after weeks in the hospital. Gary was only 48 years old. He was known not just for his work, but for his love of cooking, especially his barbecue ribs. The streets didn't just lose a leader. They lost someone who had truly tried to change the game. And the worst part, everyone knew who did it. It didn't take long for word to get out. All signs pointed back to the Rollin 60s. This wasn't random. They knew who Gary was. They knew what he stood for, and still, they pulled the trigger. The city was heartbroken. There was anger, yes, but there was also deep sadness. Because Gary had walked away from the set. He had preached peace. To go after him was to go against everything he had worked for, and the 40s knew. Gary wouldn't have wanted revenge. To strike back in his name would have gone against his mission. By mid-August, 3 suspects were in custody. All were Rollin 60s: Brandon Dixon, Dion Wright, and Omario Guerrero. They were charged with 1 count of murder for Gary's death and 4 counts of attempted murder for the others who were targeted that night. Brandon's bail was set at $8 million, Dion's at $7 million, and Omario, who was a minor at the time, was held without bail. Further investigation into the deadly feud. As investigators continued looking into the hit that claimed the life of Gary Dordan, more pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. One key detail stood out. Xavier Guerrero, the Rollin 60s member who was asked to leave the softball game, had apparently told his crew about the dispute. Police believe that his words set the plan in motion. They think his people rode out that same day to get payback. And then came the big break. Brandon Dixon, one of the suspects, had been wearing a GPS ankle monitor. Investigators tracked his movements and saw something that raised red flags. Security footage from a nearby business showed Brandon driving the black Mazda that was used in the shooting. He circled the block several times before the shots were fired. That, combined with the GPS data, placed him right at the scene. It wasn't looking good for him. When police pressed him, Brandon claimed he wasn't there for revenge. He said he pulled up to Van Ness Avenue just to buy drugs from a Rollin 40s member. According to Brandon, as soon as they got there, a man with glasses approached the car and tried to shoot him. But the guy's gun jammed. Brandon told detectives he had no idea his 2 boys were armed until they hopped out the car and started blasting, but that explanation didn't save him. In court, Brandon Dixon was sentenced to 82 years to life in prison, a sentence that left a lot of people talking. One of the actual shooters, Dion Wright, pleaded no contest to voluntary manslaughter and was only sentenced to 15 years. And Omario Guerrero, the 3rd suspect, had his case handled in juvenile court because of his age. Many in the streets and even beyond called this a miscarriage of justice. People couldn't understand how the driver, someone who didn't pull the trigger, ended up with more time than the actual gunman. But that didn't change the outcome. Gary was gone, and the impact of his death ran deep, especially because it came from people who knew exactly what he stood for. And while the city was still processing that loss, another tragedy, one even bigger, was about to shake the entire culture. Nipsey Hussle, the fallen general, and the walk toward peace. On Sunday, March 31st, 2019, the streets of South LA fell silent. That was the day the city lost Nipsey Hussle, rapper, businessman, and proud member of the Rollin 60s neighborhood Crips. Nipsey wasn't just known for his music. He was respected for putting money and effort back into the hood. His clothing store, The Marathon, sat right on Crenshaw and Slauson, deep in Rollin 60s territory. That afternoon, Nipsey stopped by the store to grab clothes for a friend who had just come home from jail. As he stood in the parking lot, talking to a group of people, a man approached and opened fire. Shots rang out, cars were hit, people ran. When the smoke cleared, Nipsey was on the ground. He was rushed to the hospital, but by 3:55 p.m., he was pronounced dead. 2 other men were shot too, but they made it. What hit even harder? The shooter was one of Nipsey's own, Eric Holder, also from the 60s. They had spoken briefly before the shots were fired, but no one can say for sure what was said. Some say Nipsey called him out for snitching. Others say it was something personal. Whatever it was, Eric felt disrespected, left the scene, came back, and pulled the trigger. The entire city went into mourning. But not just the 60s. Members of different sets, even some from rival gangs, showed love. That included people from the Rollin 40s. Even in death, there were questions about loyalty, about forgiveness, and about how far unity could go in the middle of bloodshed. But while the back and forth kept running online, something real was happening in the streets. A community activist named Latin Ward stepped up. She reached out to a Rollin 60s member known as LAAD and asked for help organizing a peace walk. LAAD didn't waste time. He got in touch with Big U and other respected names in the 60s. Plans came together fast. It's worth noting that peace talks had already been happening quietly, but Nipsey's death gave it momentum, gave it weight. And on Friday, April 5th, 2019, the city saw something rare, real unity. A message was sent out saying that a visual for Nipsey Hussle was being held from 3 to 5 that day. It invited different gangs in LA to come out and show their support. The message explained that meetings had taken place over the past 2 days with groups like the A-Trays, Rollin 60s, Hoovers, East Coasters, Bounty Hunters, and others who shared the same mindset. Everyone was asked to gather at Crenshaw and Slauson. It was made clear that the event wasn't open to the public. It was only for LA street gangs, including both Bloods and Crips, who wanted to pay respect to someone they considered a lost soldier, a good brother, a teacher, and a leader. The Peace Walk was a success. It brought together sets that had never stood side by side without heat in their hands. For once, the blocks weren't beefing. They were marching together, not in war, but in respect. All for a man who had tried to show that loyalty, leadership, and love for the community could exist, even in the gang world. But the question still hung in the air. Would it last? Would the unity stay once the cameras left and the streets got quiet again? Peace talks and a ceasefire. For years, the Rollin 40s and the Rollin 60s went at each other hard. Brothers turned enemies. Homies dropped by people they once called family. But after everything, the bodies, the betrayals, and the heartbreak, something finally shifted. A truce was made. Gangs from all over Los Angeles showed up during the memorials and peace walks following Nipsey Hussle's death. And they weren't just any gangs. A-Tray gangsters, the Hoovers, the Brims, all known rivals of the 60s, showed up in peace. That moment said everything. Even though some of the efforts didn't last, and not every truce stayed solid, it was still powerful to see the unity. For once, they weren't just banging or throwing up signs. They were standing side by side, proving that peace was possible, even in a city that's seen so much war. During this time, the 40s and 60s reached a ceasefire. The bullets stopped. The blocks got quiet. The two sets weren't exactly back to what they once were, but the tension had dropped. The streets started breathing again. But as one war ended, another one sparked, this time within the Rollin 100s. The Rollin 100s are made up of different sets that hold it down in the 100S, a section of West-South Central. The alliance includes crews like the Hard Time Hustler Crips, Underground Crips, 115 Neighborhood Crips, 111 Neighborhood Crips, Block Crips, and more. These sets had been united for decades through shared battles against other gangs like the Gangster Crips, the Hoovers, and the Bloods. But in 2021, that alliance started falling apart. On Tuesday, January 5th, 2021, the streets felt another major loss. A 36-year-old man named Lavelle Gilchrist, known to the hood as El Spy, was shot and killed near 9th and Hope Street in downtown Los Angeles. Lavelle was loved, a true rep for the Block Crips. He was loud, funny, and proud of who he was. His catchphrase, "The wait is gonna make it great." But when news spread that Lavelle was killed by the 111 Neighborhood Crips, everything exploded. There had already been tension, but El Spy's murder took it too far. This one couldn't be ignored. This one sparked a new internal war between crews that used to ride together. The shootings started up again, one after another. Retaliation. Then more retaliation. On Wednesday, September 8th, 2021, another man was gunned down. Craig Batiste, also known as Big, was shot and killed near Hobart Boulevard and 111th Street. Craig wasn't just anybody. He was a former member of the BL Crips, and at 54 years old, he had already left that life behind. Craig had become a voice of peace in the neighborhood, a father of four, but to most people, he was a father to everybody. That morning, Big was just drinking coffee with his neighbor, just talking, calm. At 8:30 a.m., a dark sedan pulled up and shots were fired. Craig tried to run but got trapped behind a fence. He couldn't escape. The bullets caught him and he didn't make it. People in the neighborhood were crushed. They said Craig was the kind of man who'd walk troubled kids to school, make sure they had food, backpacks, or whatever they needed. A woman said through tears, "You going to eat? You going to get fed? You going to have something to eat?" He was security for the whole community. Nobody understood why he was targeted. Some said it was mistaken identity. Others said it was politics. But what everyone agreed on was simple. Craig didn't deserve it. And the saddest part? His story was just like Gary Dordan's. Both men had left the gang life behind. Both were working to help the younger generation. And both were killed by the very people they once called their own. Many believed it was the 111S who were responsible for Craig's murder too. That belief tore the Rollin 100s apart. Even though other gangs in the hundreds tried to fix things, peace talks, sit-downs, meetings, nothing stuck. The hurt was too fresh. The wounds still open. Nobody was ready to forgive. And just when people thought things couldn't get worse, they did. On Monday, June 6th, 2022, at around 4 a.m., the city lost someone else. Ronaldo Reeser, the same man who helped start the softball league, the same man who built the race organization. Ronaldo had spent years pushing for unity, connecting enemies, helping crews talk instead of shoot. He didn't die from gun violence. Ronaldo was killed in a car accident in Carson, but the loss hit just as hard. Because in a city where peace is rare, Ronaldo was one of the few who truly believed in it. He didn't just say the right things, he moved different. He walked into dangerous hoods and brought people together. From the war between the 40s and 60s to the heartbreak inside the Rollin 100s, Louisiana's gang history is layered with pain, pride, and people who tried to make it better, even when it cost them everything. If someone has to take a life just to get put on, is it still about brotherhood, or is it just survival? And do you think the Rollin 40s and Rollin 60s will ever be able to fully squash the beef for good? Let us know what you think in the comments box below. And if you liked how we presented you this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.